Hello, and welcome to this session on how to do a do. Now, you're likely watching this video because you're part of some organization or group or collection of people who are coming together to accomplish something. Whether you're setting up local food systems, you're a co-op that's coming together to do things, your new paradigm village or retreat or organization, and you're trying to figure out how we make decisions and distribute value. Any group of humans that are coming together to coordinate can use these tools to do so. And what this is all about is giving you a basic blueprint of how to get started. So I've been helping organizations these last couple of weeks think about setting up their basic do. And I thought I've been seeing a shared pattern across all the organizations, similar questions. So I put this video together to answer all of those questions up front and give a blueprint that'll help organizations get started. Just a real quick thing before we get going. What is Hypha? Hypha is an organization that's focused on building new organizations and economic systems, because humanity's crises are overwhelming right now, and we need different ways to coordinate to be able to take on these challenges and build a more beautiful world, which is all Hypha is about. Is we want to build new economic and governance systems for humanity. We start by building organizations and helping those organizations network into a new type of economic system so we can build new type of civilizations. It's really important that we build new type of economic and governance systems so that we can shift out of the old paradigms that are destroying our world and into new ones. What does Hypha actually mean? Hypha is the little hairs, like these little filaments here you see here, at the end of the mycelial network that helps healthy ecosystems coordinate. So that's what Hypha as an organization is all about, is helping these ecosystems coordinate through providing tools that more effectively help us do so, which is what we're going to be getting into in this video. All right, so you want to make a do. These are all the questions you're probably asking. How do we organize? How do we reward each other? How do we decide? So what I'm going to go over in this video is some of the best practices we've learned over the last couple of years. So we're going to get into organization structure, roles, circles, badges. These are all borrowed from Sociocracy, Holacracy, and some really prominent organization styles that are showing a lot of promise today. How do we reward each other? So we're going to get into pie splitting, which is how do we distribute ownership. We're going to get into governance and voice and salary bands and how we might think about how we distribute value. And then the last one is how do we decide, which is governance. So different voting styles, get into what quorum and support mean, and how you can make a decision within your organization and get started. All of this is helping you get ready to sail. So there's 4 major things I would like you to be able to walk away with today. One is the salary bands, an idea of what you might pay each other for contributing to your cause and your organization. So what do founders get? What do the core team and members? What do investors get? All of that stuff. Some of the initial roles that you might need in your organization. Some basic organization and circle design, give you a concept and idea of what that actually means, all so you can launch and grow and get going. The main idea here is we don't want to let perfection get in the way of good enough for now. We want to give you a basic blueprint to get started so you can go and start serving your mission and vision and do all the beautiful things and all the epic stuff you're trying to do in the world, and not let these governance and economic systems bog you down for years or cause a lot of tensions because they don't exist. That's the other thing I've been seeing a lot of groups do, is they don't want to get bogged down by the organization and governance strategy. So even though they want to build a new paradigm organization, they just default to the traditional pyramid structure because that's what they know, and that's what came most easy to them. So we want to help you be able to step out of that pattern without it dominating your life and taking too much of your time and being a distraction. So that's actually what Hypha did. For the last 4 years, we've been getting really distracted. One of our purposes is building technology, but the other thing we probably spent most time on is governance, organization, how we decide, all of these meta questions to come up with a framework that's helpful for us, and we want to pass that information and wisdom on to you so that maybe you can benefit from it. All right, let's keep going. So what is the do? The do is a tool for coordinating more effectively. So we call it coordination as a service. So how does it set apart from other DAOs in the whole Web3 space, and why we didn't use those DAOs when we got started? Because we didn't get started to build DAOs. We got started to build a new economic system. We were working on seeds. But after a while, we needed to figure out how are we coordinating. So we ended up building our own DAO system because there's no existing tools that were good enough for us. One of the big reasons why is because currently there's very few, I haven't seen any other ones, that are doing fee-free on-chain governance. So governance is actually happening on-chain, that's actually decentralized and transparent and immutable, and you're not having to pay to do it. We didn't like the idea of having to pay money or having people have to pay money in order to participate in governance. So everything in Hypha on-chain is fee-free, which is really important. Second thing that was really important for us is treasury management. We had some funds. We needed to make sure that they were secured. We didn't have a bank account. We didn't have a legal entity. We weren't interested in setting any of those up, and we didn't want to give one person too much control by just giving them the keys. So we needed one way where the organization as a whole could decide how we're spending money and to be able to trust that. So that was the main thing, treasury management. As we got going, we built a whole diverse suite of compensation tools. So instead of just every person coming up and saying, hey, I did X, I would like to get paid Y, we brought in roles and assignments and quests and all these different ways that you can distribute value throughout your organization, which we'll get into a little bit later. How we've been focused on building Hypha and this whole DAO ecosystem is with building blocks. So we'll get into all these different things we call primitives, which are basic tools that each organization can then use to build their own type of organization system. So what Hypha has been doing is building this suite that with all of these different primitives and knobs and switches that they can turn to build their own type of organization and governance system that meets their needs. So we're not coming in here to prescribe and say this is how things ought to happen. We're coming in here to say these are the tools that you have at your disposal to build your own type of economic systems and governance systems for your community to best meet your needs. You could pause this and you can read some more here if you'd like to, but I'm going to keep going. So this is what the new DO is actually going to look like. So I'm just giving you an idea of the new layout, how it feels, and at the end of this video I'm going to go into the current DAO do and actually show you what it looks like and how it works. But this is giving you an idea of what it would look like. So you get a good idea of what's happening in your organization. As a quick snapshot, you have a news feed and all this fun stuff. Okay, moving on. So this is what voting would actually look like. It'll tell you the voting parameters up here. Unity. Unity is how much need to be in support of something in order for it to pass. And these are knobs that each organization can design themselves. We'll get into that in a bit. And also quorum, which is a minimum number of members or voice in your organization that need to vote on something in order for it to pass. So a support level, kind of. And then you can look at all the different proposals. You can see the quorum, you can see the unity, and what it looks like here. So that's kind of the proposal dashboard. This is a proposal details. And this is where it starts getting really interesting, is the different types of tokens that Hypha offers. So a lot of the DAOs in the space today, they have one token for governance and for value capture. So the same token that's used for voting is the same token that you can go and buy on exchanges. So essentially what we've designed here is said we want pure oligarchies, plutocracies, meaning governance by the wealthy. The more money you have, the more tokens you can acquire. The more tokens you have, the more voice you have, and you can use that to acquire more tokens, and it creates a feedback loop that tends to concentrate wealth. That wasn't working for us, so we needed to build a new platform where we can separate the voice token from the value utility, however you want to design the new token. We call it a contribution accounting token. So the one that is tradable, that does have value, that can be traded amongst people and sold on exchanges and all that stuff, is a separate token from the voice token, which cannot be traded and exchanged. Once you earn voice, it's locked into your account. You're the only one that has it. End of story. You can't give it away. So those are two different tokens you see here. One with H-Voice, the other one with Hypha tokens. The other one is our payment token. For a while, we were using seeds until we ran out of seeds. And now we're using our own US dollar stablecoin, which has a claim to our treasury. And these are the basic tokens that every new DO is going to be able to offer. Their own fiat token stablecoin that's backed by their own treasury. Their own utility, value capture, whatever you want to design and call it, token that represents your organization, and then your own voice token. Okay, so those are three main tokens, and you see them being claimed down here with this proposal. I'll show you a little bit more in proposals at the end after you get a better idea of what I'm talking about. Then there's a bunch of different proposal categories that you get to have as your organization. So a lot of traditional DAOs where you come up and say, hey, I did X, I want to get paid Y. And if you're a regular contributor, you have to continually come back and keep saying what you did and how you claimed it. And that was a lot of tedious work for us in the early stages. So we built a whole bunch of different proposal categories to kind of solve that. So you have this one-time activity category, which you can come in and have a bridge, like you're between roles and you want to get paid. Expense, this is how you handle expenses when you're completely decentralized. So a member pays something for the organization, maybe buys a software that the organization needs, or buys plane tickets if that's needed, or whatever the organization needs to pay for, and then comes in here and asks for compensation for that expense. Quests. So quests are, I would like to do XYZ. Does the community want me to do that? And I would like to get paid ABC for it. And then the community as a whole is like, yes, we like that quest. We're going to pass it. but the pay doesn't happen yet. The pay happens after the person then goes and executes the quest. But the quest is a signaling proposal, so they don't put in a whole bunch of time to do something without knowing if the community actually wants it or is willing to pay them for it. So we design these quests. Anyway, we'll get into some more proposal types later. This is just to give you an idea that there's a lot of flexibility in this due structure of how you reward and compensate different actions and behaviors in your organization. Before we dive into a little bit more about how we can recommend structuring, we want to give you a little bit of our design philosophy. One being transparent organizations. So it's the big part of the D in DO, is that they're decentralized, they're transparent. People can see everything that's happening within the organization. So things like salary, of how much people are getting paid, you can't hide that. You know, traditional organizations solve that inequality by no one talking about it. They create cultures where you're not supposed to ask how much gets paid, how much someone gets paid. Nobody knows how much anyone else is getting paid. And it's a very, competitive environment because of that. But we don't have that luxury, which is a benefit here, a feature. So we have to design our organizations with a different philosophy where we have to have objective reasoning why someone's getting paid something, because everyone can see how much they're getting paid. They're going to ask that question, right? You can't hide that. So the answer can't be, oh, well, they're getting paid more than twice as much as you because they knew the right person or they were better at negotiating. That's not a good enough answer. So instead, we need objective frameworks of why someone's getting a salary raise, why they're getting paid more, right? So this is part of the design philosophy of how we're setting up these organizations. The other one is the open organization. As Hypha, we wanted to be a DAO, decentralized. People can come in, offer different value to the organization. So we wanted really flexible membership. Every organization can decide how flexible they want their membership to be. They can assign their own person to be able to onboard people. We'll get into that badge at the end. But for us, we wanted to align incentives for the intended outcome. So we wanted to use game theory to design the outcomes we wanted rather than command, force, and control. Traditional corporations are all about force and control. We're going to pay you money and you're going to get paid as long as you're doing exactly what your boss is telling you to do. If you don't, you're going to get fired. So we're going to coerce you to doing that, and you risk losing your job if you don't. And since the job market is really pernicious, then you get people trapped into basically indentured servitude and slavery and blah, blah, blah. We all know the story. Instead, we wanted to align incentives where people are encouraged and incentivized and rewarded for doing the beneficial outcomes that the organization wants. So rather than trying to coerce people through punishment, we try to reward people through the right incentives and behaviors. So that's how open organizations and DAOs are really revolutionizing the world by being way better for humanity and way better for us by not using coercion as a coordinating force, instead using rewards and incentives. And if that's the case, then we need to completely up-level how we're doing self-organization. Because if we're saying we don't have a command-control pyramid structure where we have bosses telling you what to do, instead, people are going to have to figure out, how do I self-organize? How do I figure out what needs to get done? What can I do? We needed to create clear frameworks that gave people this autonomy and authority so they could be creative. So they could tap into what their passion is and empower them to be able to contribute to these new organizations. And this is a total paradigm shift that we're still only in the middle of the way through because people were used to being bossed around. And now we have to relearn a new strategy where we've got to come and decide and figure out and understand and kind of self-govern and self-author our own reality. And in order for that to not to be a chaotic mess that's just too confusing and nobody gets it, we needed to build structures and frameworks that supported that goal. So we needed to provide that clarity. And that's what we've done by borrowing from Sociocracy and Teal and some of these other frameworks to build into the Hypha DHO that you see here today. So that was some of the design philosophy that we brought to this table. The main theory is, we want to give people the tools they need to thrive and then let them go about thriving. So transparency, everyone can see, role-based. This is another huge thing. The role is not the soul. We really want to separate out what we're compensating. We're compensating a role, which has some behaviors attached to it. We'll get into that. So that role is adding value. That's getting value. That's what's getting paid, not the person filling that role. So we're coming in and saying that role is valuable. That role gets this much money, not this person is valuable. This person gets that much money. So we separate that out. And that's really important because that changes the layer of conversation where people aren't taking it personally. We're talking about roles, we'll get into that a little bit more in a bit. That's it for the screen. You can pause it and read this if you want. Moving on. Cool, so now we're going to get into roles and circles. So what is a role? What is a circle? So both of them are defined by these characteristics. Both a role and a circle has a purpose, why it exists. What is it actually bringing to the organization, and how is it serving the organization's purpose, right? So this is the holonic fractaling natures. The organization as a whole has a purpose. It has a why it exists. And then every circle and role that's part of that organization reflects that organization's purpose to say, how is it helping serve that organization purpose, right? So why does that role or circle exist? Where it exists. So is that role part of the circle, right? Accountability, what can be expected of it? So this helps all the other members of the organization know what to expect from different members filling different roles. Because they can come in and say, okay, I can expect this role to provide a quarterly report every quarter. That's part of my accountabilities. Okay, so I can expect that that's going to happen from me. Okay. Domain, what does it exclusively control? Now, this is really, really important because then as new people join the organization, they know who to talk to about certain things. For example, the website might be a domain that somebody controls. You want to make that explicit, because then if someone wants to make a change to the website, they know who to talk to get that change done. So this helps, encourage self-organization to actually happen by providing all of this clarity up front. Okay. And then the last bit is the assignment. So the roles can exist, and you actually see here. So here's a role that exists, but there's nobody in it. So there's a difference between these people that you see filling a role and the roles themselves. This role has two people filling it, right? So this is a real big difference between the role being a person and people filling roles. So in this little very basic example, we only have 3 team members, right? But we have 3 different circles, and each team member is filling multiple roles across the organization, right? So then each role can have a really clear boundary for it. So you have this guy, he's in 1, 2, 3 different roles, right? But each role has its own domain. What is it doing? What's it accountable for? But he's accountable for a lot. There's only 3 people in this organization. They're all probably founder types. They're doing a lot to make this organization work, right? And this is all being captured here. So then when a 4th person joins the team, they get to show up and be like, okay, what's she doing? What is she up to? I can click on her role. I can see what she's actually doing. Awesome. The other thing you see here is every organization starts off with this anchor circle. It's the foundational core circle. So this is where you start, and then you grow into more circles as you need to. So, your anchor circle might have 1 person and 1 role doing marketing, but then 4 more people join to do marketing. Okay, so now you set up a marketing circle where you have 3 different roles that those 4 different people are filling, etc. So this is just how you scale by adding more circles, more roles. And you can infinitely scale down too. What you see here is within this subcircle of the anchor circle, there's another subcircle. And within that, there's another subcircle. And there's a role in that subcircle. So you can infinitely scale down by adding new circles of teams. So this is how organizations can scale in either direction infinitely, while still having small agile teams that make up these circles and providing that clarity through roles. What you see here with this lamplighter thing, this is the connection that connects every new circle with the anchor circle. Right, so every new circle that's formed, you want to have someone be, we call them lamplighters, we borrowed that from Burning Man, but you can call them whatever you want. They're traditionally called links. And these are people that just link circles together. And there's a badge for that in the DO, so you can see who's holding this role, what they're doing. So this way you can have one meeting in the center that has all of these links, all these lamplighters, and they're the ones that are able to percolate information out throughout the rest of the organization. Okay. So this is the very basic concept, and we would say just get started with this. Don't try to figure everything out, Holacracy, Sociocracy, some of these frameworks are very complex. But just getting this basic structure in place to grow from is going to help you avoid, defaulting to the pyramid structure if you don't want that. So I'd say start off with an anchor circle, just get really clear on the roles that each people are bringing. And again, if they're bringing a founder role, great, just make that explicit. Say this is founder role, they're doing a whole bunch of different stuff, awesome. Because then when a new person shows up, they're like, cool, we have 3 people playing that founder role. Got it, now I understand their founder types, and now I know where I fit into this picture. Rather than that just being something that's actually happening and you put a superficial lens on what you want to happen. So what I really, really recommend here is create the structure based on the reality of how the organization is currently working, not on what you want it to be. So if someone's playing a founder type role, great, make that a founder type role. Just make it explicit what's happening. Don't try to overcomplicate things. Cool. This is how you go and, actually request compensation. You can pause this and read this out, and I'm going to get into the do what this actually looks like. But I was showing you before, so this is one of the application forms. At the top, you put in there why, what value you're bringing to the community. We use OKRs, but every organization can use whatever they want. OKRs are objectives and key results. You get to say, what is my objective, and what are my key results that let you know if I've met that objective or not. And this gives the whole community a way of measuring, are people being effective at adding value to the community? And this is how people are assessing each other and how they're voting, right? So you can come in and say, why does the org need what you're offering? Why are you the person to do it? What the community could expect from you. And you put all of this in your application form for applying to either a role or a quest or making a contribution. These are all important for the community to know in order for them to have the information they need to be able to vote for you to say, do we want to create with you? Do we want to play with you? Do we want to give you this payout? So that's the next box here, is you get to put in how much you want to be compensated for bringing value to the community. And you put it in a US dollar amount. But, and I'll actually walk you through this at the end. So I'm not going to get into too much detail about this, but in short form, you put in the payout you want. It gives you all the different tokens for your earning voice, your utility token, and you're actually earning part of your treasury, etc. And then you put in the contribution dates. So when are you starting? When are you ending? What we've done is every assignment, every badge has an expiration date attached to it. Because what we've found is it's a lot easier for an organization that's decentralized and using voting like this to not say yes to something than it is to say no to something. Because no causes a lot of contention and frustration. Some people don't like to do it. Yes, in a perfect world, people are saying no if they're thinking no. But in the reality of what we've experienced these last 4 years is that doesn't necessarily happen because some people just don't feel like getting into an argument or causing tension. So what we've done is to say everything expires. So that's requiring that the organization renews itself. This also means you don't have to have a role that's going in there and trying to find stuff that no longer exists anymore. Maybe someone was filling a role and they just decided not to show up anymore. They disappeared. Like, if that was the case and nothing expired, they could be continually getting paid out indefinitely. So it needs an expiration date. Otherwise, it would need someone to come in there and be like, oh yeah, Bob hasn't showed up to work in the last, 3 years. We should, actually put up a proposal to stop that from paying him out. So what we've done is we've set a 3-month expiration date, but every org can set their own. So we're saying the maximum you can hold an assignment for is 3 months. And then every 3 months, the community needs to re-agree to continue to create with you. From a legal point of view, this is also really great because we don't have any employees. Everyone is a short-term contractor, which means everyone's taking care of their own taxes and their own benefits and all of that extra stuff. Also, we didn't have a legal entity to have technical employees. So what we're saying is everyone's putting together a contract where we're saying this is what you're getting paid, this is how much you're working, or how long you're working for, and this is what you're doing during that period. And this is basically the basic agreement that every member is coming to the do with. All right, so this is where we want to try to simplify things dramatically for groups. This is the process we went through. At the very beginning, we had people just put in whatever salary they felt was right or appropriate. And what we ended up finding, or at least this was my interpretation, is it had a lot more to do with, ego of what someone thought that they were worth, more so than it had to do with the value of that role or how much value that role was bringing to the organization. So we're bringing a lot of old world, energy into this new paradigm, and it got mucky and weird, and it was a lot of contention. It was gross. We also tried doing, fair market value rates for roles. We said, okay, you're doing this role that's similar to these, old world jobs. Let's take an average of their pay. It was very complex, and it took a lot of time, and it really didn't reach optimal outcomes. So instead, what we evolved to is this idea of salary bands. And it's not a new idea, although the big tech companies do salary bands. But the idea is that a role is then attached to a certain level of complexity. How complex is that role in order for that role to be able to get accomplished? And we have 7 different layers of complexity. And at the end of this, you can look at the Hypha Handbook where we get into this in more detail and explain our rationalization and thinking. And you can copy that, you can fork it, you can modify it, you can learn from what we've done, make adjustments for your own cultural context. That's really what we're trying to encourage here is to, we've been at this for 4 years, we've learned a lot. We want you to take what we've learned, build on it, improve it, make it your own. And selfishly, we might be able to benefit from you as you come up with really cool processes and strategies for how to do it better. So that's really the way that this could synergize as an ecosystem, and we can have a lot of fun together. So either way, getting back into this, bands helped us a lot. We said band 1 has this level of complexity. It's got this level of technical or organizational complexity, what's required in order to actually do that role. How much responsibility and accountability is this role taking on? And then we're going to assign that a band so that we have an objective metric. For this role is this level of objective complexity, and you're either doing it or you're not. And that is really, really important for trying to figure out how we compensate people, is to get as objective as possible. We're never going to get there, but the closer we can get to objectivity versus subjectivity, the less drama and infighting and all of that nonsense we can avoid, because we can have a protocol that says this is why that person's getting compensated this way, and we have a clear reason why, and a clear path for them to move up or move down or whatever they want. Our thinking is the more complex something is, the more mind share it takes up, the more dedicated you have to be, the more skills you have to have, which all relate to saying we're going to compensate you more if you're bringing more to the table, right? So anyway, you can dive into the handbook to get more into this, but we recommend every group start off with their own bands. If you're just getting started, you're a small group, you're all basically showing up the same way, start off with one band. Say, okay, we're one band, we're all going to pay ourselves $200,000 across the board, and just leave it at that. Awesome. And then you can add bands as you add more complexity. So don't try to overthink this to start off with. Just keep it simple, keep it most appropriate to your current reality, and go from there. Or the do is flexible. You can add unique salaries if you want. You can do fair market value. You can put whatever salary for any role you want. But we just highly recommend using bands to try to simplify that so that you can get back to doing what you want to do rather than keep talking about how to compensate each other. So once you've set up bands that give you your base salary, it's badges that you use to give bonuses. You can have a badge that every year you earn a yearly badge, and that gives you a 3% bonus in your salary. Awesome. So we want to give 3% bonuses every year. You can use a badge for that. We want to say, let's give badges to experts. Okay, so if you've attended this course or workshop, you get to earn this badge, and if you've earned this badge, you get a 2% bonus, or whatever it is. So badges are how we can then give multipliers to the salary or to the voice distribution. So badges can also give more voice to certain members who have done certain things. So badges are then attached to the member, while salary bands are attached to the role that member is filling, right? And there's a very big difference because we're saying this role is bringing this much value to the organization, okay? And an individual can then step into that role and they bring all the badges that are attached to that individual, right? So the individual has earned that 3x multiplier for being there for 3 years or whatever it is. So that's how we kind of separate that. Salaries are attached to roles, badges are attached to people, and those are the two tools that we give within an organization to come up with all number of compensation strategies you want to come up with. The final piece that we have to tweak all of this is commitment level. So to walk someone through, they show up, they pick their role is a band 2, so maybe they're getting $90,000 a year or whatever. They have a badge that gives them a 5% bonus, cool. But their commitment level, they're only showing up half time, so they're only at 50%. So it's going to cut their salary in half and pay them half, right? Or they're just dabbing in this, they're going to get 10% or 100%. So the commitment level slider is able to, capture how committed someone is to the organization, whether they're full-time, part-time, whatever. And the commitment slider is something that we use for vacation. When anyone wants to take time off, they just slide their commitment level down to 0 and they step away. And people are doing that literally all the time, and it's a really flexible organization because it's really cool. We don't have vacation hours, we don't have any of that. But you're showing up, put your commitment level to what percent you're showing up. If you stepped away, slide it down. If you want to come in more, you can bring it back up. And it gives that flexibility for people to do that. So just to give you an idea of the bands that we've used, so maybe you can learn from this, we chose $70,000 as our base. So we said band 1 is $70,000. Why? Because Harvard and Stanford and some other institutions did some research that showed that if you're making less than $70,000, then money is a barrier to happiness. If you're making more than $70,000, money has no impact on your happiness, right? And we think that's really important. If someone's working full-time for this organization, money shouldn't be a barrier to them being able to meet their needs and to be able to be happy and to thrive on this world, right? This also set us a base floor. We said we can't hire anyone if they're not bringing at least $70,000 worth of value. Otherwise, we're going to be losing value. So this helps us move more towards automation and being intelligent about what roles we actually need a human to fill. We don't need to bring in humans to do busy work that we would only pay a couple dollars an hour for. That's just, it's just bringing in, a lot of this is my own judgment, so I'm actually going to stop there. So we started off with 70,000 as the base level. We chose 130 as our median, so that's our fourth band. And 130,000 was because if everyone in the U.S. took home the same salary, the average would be 130K. So we said, cool, that is our average salary too, which then put 190,000 as our seventh band. And each band changes 20,000 each. So anyway, this is just the logic that we put into this, but we really encourage every organization to come up with their own logic for their own context and culture that makes sense for them, their cost of living and all that stuff. So anyway, bands are something that could dramatically simplify how you're doing salaries. So my recommendation is to figure out the minimum number of bands you need as an organization, attach a number to that, and then have that be equal and transparent across the board. And try to make it objective as possible. And you can see what Hypha did to try to get to that point, to say, what does it mean to actually be in this band or not? Okay. So yeah, that was a whole lot unpacked there, but just to give you some thinking. The next big thing that every new venture and institution and startup deals with is how to split the pie. So traditionally, it starts off with a founder shows up, they own 100% of it. They're going to create an arbitrary amount of shares because you have to when you create your new entity. So, I'm going to create 1 million shares. I own 100% of them. Cool. My co-founder comes in. He negotiates really well. I want to give him 20%. He wants 30%. We negotiate back and forth. He's great at it, so he gets 30%. Okay, cool. Now I'm going to transfer 300,000 shares to him. This is the traditional story with pie splitting. Starts off, one person owns all of it, they distribute it out. The reason for this, I'm not trying to throw too much shade on that model, is because every time you issue new shares, you got to go through a whole bunch of legal paperwork. You got to bring in lawyers. It's a lot of time and energy with issuing shares, so you don't want to do it often. You want to make that agreement once and say, cool, you got 30%, let's get back to work. You don't want to continue to go back there and renegotiate the percentage of the ownership of the company that you have. So this is one of the major evolutions that the DAOs and dues and tokens are bringing to the world, because you do have that flexibility. Now issuing and distributing a new share is as simple as passing a proposal that's asking for new shares. So we don't have to follow that traditional model, where someone owns 100% of some arbitrary amount of tokens to begin with. Instead, we say, this is what Hypha did, and any DAO can do it their own way. You can issue an arbitrary amount of tokens and make it a max if you want. You can do whatever you want. But what we recommend is that you start off with 0 tokens. And then when anyone makes a contribution, you mint tokens and give it to them. So the organization starts off with 0. A founder that's been working on an idea for years, they're really genius or whatever, they come in and say, hey, I'm bringing intellectual property worth $500,000. That's my initial contribution. Great. So you mint $500,000 and you give it to that, or 500,000 tokens, and you give it to that person. Cool. So now 500,000 tokens exist, and this organization is said to own $500,000 of intellectual property. All right. Then an investor comes in and says, I'm going to give, $1 million worth of dollars. So we mint 1 million tokens, we send it to that new person, and we put $1 million in a bank account. Actually, let's use Bitcoin because it's simpler. So we put $1 million worth of Bitcoin in a Bitcoin wallet. Awesome. So now this organization controls 1 million in Bitcoin and 500,000 worth of intellectual property, and there's $1.5 million or 1.5 million tokens in existence. Sorry for the confusion. So this is how the contribution accounting is then tracked. Then someone else comes in and they're like, all right, I'm going to be a founder and I want to work for $300,000 a year, but I'm not going to take any cash up front because I want to take it all in equity. Great. So every week that they're working, they're issued and generated new tokens. And then after a year, that person's owning 300,000 tokens. That investor has 1 million tokens. That person that brought the intellectual property and did nothing else, they have 500,000 tokens, etc., etc. So this process goes on to actually capture all of the value that's coming into the organization and then issue equity back out to people who aren't getting paid up front. So what this allows you to do is then create an organization that has an infinite treasury that can do a contribution accounting from the beginning. This is all like a holdup for so many groups to get started on working for something because they're waiting for that organization to have a treasury first to start paying them. But you can actually come in, start issuing tokens, start rewarding people for showing up today, and you can get the ball rolling in a more equitable way. And again, since everything's transparent, we're wanting to build new organizations, this model says, why does that person own 50% of the organization? We're saying, well, he brought 50% of the value. You can see a record of it on chain right here. You can see everything he brought. It's like, oh, cool, great, makes sense, it's clear, I got it. And using this model reduces so much of the infighting and arguments and hours and hours talking and legal. I mean, it just simplifies this process so much easier to come to a fair understanding of how to distribute value by marking it every step of the way. To give you an idea, this is kind of what Hyphas look like. So very few people were part of Hypha at the beginning, and it was kind of concentrated here in a few people's hands. But then over time, as more and more contributions came to the table, it got more and more distributed as the organization matured. And this is what we would see with any organization following this model. Is over time, it's going to get more and more decentralized, getting more and more of the value of the organization over to the people who are contributing to it, which is what we want. Is we want contributor-owned organizations, not founder-investor-owned organizations, right? So we got rid of the arbitrary pie splitting, and we got into contribution accounting, a much more clear, fair, objective way of distributing ownership of the organization. So this is also one place we've applied a little bit of game theory as far as Hypha is concerned. So we have this deferral concept. And at the very start of Hypha, we said every Hypha token is worth $1 right now. But we're going to say in 6 months' time, we're going to say Hypha tokens are worth, $1.20. And we're going to slowly tip up how much we're valuing one of those tokens. So what this says is when you're coming into the organization early and you're taking on more risk, you're getting a token price for a smaller value than you would if you waited on it. So this game theory is, okay, if I believe in this mission, I believe in this organization, I think it's going to be a success, I want to take as much as possible in the organization token and only take as little as I need in dollars up front and actually use that treasury that the organization's holding. And this is exactly how Hypha worked. We had this mechanic for about 2 years where people are taking very little out of the treasury and they're taking the majority of their tokens. I think our average for the first 2 years was like 85%. We're getting paid out in equity tokens and utility tokens, the Hypha token, right? So this helps really extend the treasury. We were able to go a really long way without having to bring in any significant investors, and we still didn't. We didn't bring in any VC money. We got millions of dollars worth of value added to the organization, built a lot of tools, and we had to raise very little money in order to make that happen. So this really helps extend the treasury by using some game theory dynamics to help people, get ownership of the organization, but also help it go really far away. Cool. So some legal considerations. First and foremost, Hypha nor I are accountants or lawyers or certified, and this is not legal advice. And ignore all of this. If you do want to talk to a lawyer, you can reach out to us. We know a couple that are doing these, legal entities to DAOs things. It's really cool. It's really cutting edge. But yeah, let's get into this. So instead of having lawyers and paperwork for issuing your, what represents ownership of your enterprise together, you can issue tokens. Much more flexibility, much more dynamic, can be much more true. But we can start now looking at legal entities as a service, which is here. There's a bunch of different legal entity types that are all spinning up, and each one of them might be best suited for your context. Wyoming just launched the Wyoming DAO LLC. This is really cool. We actually set up one of the very first ever back in July. And basically what it says is we have a legal entity now that's pointing to the blockchain to say this is true. So then if we want to reissue tokens and shares of our Hypha entity, we get to do so by issuing new tokens. Really simple. We don't have to bring lawyers back into the equation, but we get the benefits of both. Now we have a legal entity that's reflecting that, and we can use this token model to much more dynamically give out equity of this company. Really, really awesome being able to have that balance. Maybe you don't want to be a for-profit enterprise. You could set up an unincorporated nonprofit association. You could set up a trust. You could set up a spiritual ministry. There's a whole lot of different legal entities that are being used and employed right now to be that legal entity as a service interface for decentralized organizations. And it's a really, really cool space. And it kind of shifts the way that we think about employing those the legal entities. But what we recommend is just get started. You can get started. It could be completely decentralized. Hypha was for many years before we ever set up a legal entity. We recommend, anyone can just basically do the same. But get advice from a lawyer depending on what type of company you're setting up or what type of organization or platform. Okay. So keep going. We're going to get into vote scope. So you can have a different type of voting policy, a different type of voting strategy per treasury. And within one organization, each circle they don't need to, have their own treasury. So then this circle, let's say all of these circles have their own treasury. So this circle could say, well, we use consent in this circle to make decisions. Cool. So they can use consent on-chain voting in order to distribute their treasury. This circle says we use one token, one vote. So contribution voting, awesome. This person says we use one person, one vote. So everyone has the exact same voice. Awesome. All of this becomes possible within a DAO, where each circle can set up their own voting strategy within the whole organization. And what's cool here is then we can work towards more experiments. As one circle figures out a voting strategy that really works, the whole org can be like, yeah, we really like that. That works well. Let's adopt that for an organization voting strategy, right? But each context where there's a treasury and there's decisions needing to be made, that context can have their own decision-making happening within that context, which we're going to get into what those decisions are. I'll come back to this in a second. Actually, we'll start here. So what requires a vote? There's two primary ways of looking at this. There's structural votes, the things the organization owns. So these are organization assets, right? So a role, for example, is an organization asset. The role or the organization owns the role. Members don't own roles, right? So the organization as a whole, anyone in the organization can come up and say, I want to make an edit to that role. I want to make a new role. I want to delete that role, whatever, and make proposals to do those things, right? So the role applies to the organization. Same thing as a circle or badges that people can apply for, or policies and protocols and code changes. All of these are proposals that affect the whole organization, right? So these are owned by the whole. All of these require an organization vote. So individual circles aren't going to be able to make a decision to change the policy and protocol of the whole organization, right? Individual circle can't make a proposal to add a new circle unless they're making a sub-circle within their circle, right? Cool, so there's one context, what the organization owns. Then there's what the members own. So members don't own roles, they own an assignment to a role. Or a member saying, I'm part of that role for the next 3 months. That's something a member owns, and that's what's paying that member. Members can come in and say, I own an assignment to a badge. I don't own that badge is not mine. I am assigned that badge for this period of time. Okay? So members own assignments to roles and badges. Members can own quests if they're a part of it. So if they're part of that quest, that's their quest that they're a part of at that time, and they're getting paid out for it. You know, members make investment proposals. They put up a proposal to say, hey, I want to invest 1 million Bitcoins, into this new endeavor. I want to invest 1 billion seeds or whatever it is. They make a proposal, then the organization's like, yep, they vote on that, and then they can be issued tokens, right? Or expenses, all the stuff. So this is the stuff the member owns, right? So this is just giving you a context. What needs to get voted on? So what you don't see here is day-to-day decisions, operational decisions. You don't see a proposal where the person dealing with social media needs to come and ask the whole if they should run a new social media strategy. They don't need to. They would only need to if there's a new expense. So they might come up and say, hey, I want to run a social media strategy, and it's going to cost another $100,000. Cool. Then they put up a proposal saying they have a $100,000 expense. But if it doesn't cost anything extra to do that, they don't need to ask permission. So what we've done is we've empowered the individual filling roles to do everything they need, make all the decisions they need all on their own. They don't have to come back and ask permission from the org on how to execute their role, right? They only need to ask permission if it's going to take organization assets to do so, if it needs to cost more money or whatever. So what we see here is probably, if I'm putting a random number out there, 80%, probably more, of decisions that have been made within Hypha aren't on-chain. These are things that are just day-to-day decisions. How do we execute my role? I didn't have to ask anyone permission to make this video, right? I didn't have to put up a vote saying, do we want to have this video made and pay me $100 to do it? I am in a role, an assignment that's meant to be creating this type of content, so I'm choosing to make this all on my own. And this is the type of environment of self-organization that these organization styles can foster, right? Okay, so open governance. So I talked at the very beginning of this concept of governance primitives. So we wanted to build these basic tools that can allow for a wide diversity of governance styles to all exist within the basic number of tool sets. So we've built 3 basic parameters that give rise to, I'm going to talk about 8 here, different governance styles. And the 3 different parameters are voice token variance. So this is how much voice variance there is between token holders. At the low end, every person owns 1 token. So it's 1 person, 1 vote. So that's no voice variance. Everyone has the same. And then you have at the high end, 1 person owns all the voice, and the rest of the 99 people own hardly anything at all. So that's the extremes. Is, what's the variance between voice token ownership in your organization? The second one is quorum. How many people need to vote on a proposal in order for it to pass? So you get to set what percentage that is. And the last one is unity. How many people need to be in favor or against that proposal in order for it to pass? So we'll start off here. Classic democracy. One person, one vote. The quorum, let's say it's 20%. And the unity is 50. If it gets more than 50%, it passes. This is, classic democracy voting that we all know about. If it gets more than 50, cool, they win. There's a lot of things broken with this, but a lot of people then misinterpret the concept of voting, expressing your opinion, with the classic democratic systems and think all voting is broken. I'm coming here to say all of this is different voting styles, and we can have an infinite array of different governance outcomes while still using the action of voting. So anyway, classic democracy. If you want to use that, great. Highly recommend against it, but hey, that's my opinions. Then you have consent. And consent is that nobody's blocking it. So then how do you set that up? Well, consent could be high voice token variance, but very likely if nobody's blocking it, you want to have a really low variance. So most people have basically the same opinion. Very low quorum. It doesn't need to take a lot of people supporting it to pass. All you need is that nobody votes against it. So you have 100% unity. As long as nobody comes in there and blocks it, it's going to pass. So that's consent voting. And you could set that up by having low quorum, really high or 100% unity, whatever voice token variance you want. Consensus, similar. Voice token variance could be across the board, but very likely you really want low variance in order to really embody the ethos of consensus. But consensus is where everyone agrees. So if you want everyone to agree on something for it to pass, then you set your quorum at 100%. Everyone needs to vote, and everyone needs to be in favor of it in order for it to pass. So you can run consensus. You could run this distributed voice, which is what Hypha does. Hypha actually says we want 20% quorum, and we want 80% unity. You think 50% is completely broken, because if 20% of the voting within Hypha is saying something's not a good idea, it probably isn't, and there's some flaw that we need to upgrade in order to make a better decision. So we set a pretty high unity and recommend others do the same, because that's going to be able to capture more wisdom. You don't want it to be too high unless you're going for consent or consensus, where it's really easy to block stuff. But also this depends on how open your organization is. If you have really tight boundaries within your circle where there's a really clear membership, and it's really, really easy, and you know all the people that are holding voice, consensus and consent make a lot more sense, and they could be employed. But if you have a really loose and open and decentralized organization where anyone can show up, add voice, and weigh in on decisions, you probably don't want this, because you can have a troll stopping things from moving forward, right? So anyway, so this is where distributed voice comes in. You can use your unity. You probably don't want to go lower than 50% for something to pass. That is kind of a little bit backwards, where more than the majority needs to be against it for it to fail. But hey, up to every organization to design this on their own. Quorum is really important because this is how many people need to weigh in on something. So this gets into what we've found, and it's probably likely across the board, is people have an easier time not saying yes than they do saying no. And this is where quorum comes in, because it requires that people actually come in and say yes on something, where something can't pass just because nobody said no and nobody stopped it. So depending on how much support you want proposals to have for them to pass, you're going to adjust this quorum. And the same thing with unity. The unity concept is how much of a signal that something is not a good idea do you want in order for something to fail. Too high and, trolls can block stuff. Too low and you're probably not making good decisions. So all of this is up for, organizations to tweak and find out that sweet spot that works for them. Let's get into a few more. So we can run an oligarchy. You can have, governance by a minority. And in some cases, this might make a lot of sense. It might be an investment DAO, where it's people putting in a lot of money and they're the ones calling all the shots, and everyone else is just working for them. Cool, they can set that up. They can have really high voice token variance where the investors hold all the voice and everyone else kind of has a small say, but not very significant one. It doesn't take very much quorum because maybe the investors don't want everyone having to show up. If a couple investors think it's a good idea, great, let's pass it. But they're traditional, capitalists. They think traditionally, so they're just going to keep their unity at 50%, majority rule. Cool, you can have an oligarchy set up this way. There's no judgment. Oligarchies aren't good or bad. Depends on the context, right? You can run a dictatorship. One person owns all the voice. It requires 100% quorum and unity to pass. Great, we can run a dictatorship under this. You can run an anarchy, where, voice token variance, everyone has the same voice, but requires no quorum at all and no unity, so you can't block anything. Anything goes, Put up as much proposals as fast as you want. Anarchy, kind of a mess. You can run undiscovered. which is just the infinite variety of ideas that have yet to be uncovered using these 3 different knobs. Here's kind of a joke one where, you can't necessarily block it by saying no, but it does require quorum. So this is like governance by the most interesting. It doesn't matter if people are voting against it or for it. It's like, that's irrelevant. What's relevant is that people are voting for it. So if something gets a lot of votes, it gets a high quorum, we're going to pass it. Voice token variance kind of all over the place. That could be something fun to play with. But anyway, there's an infinite variety of different governance strategies, and these are all the classic ones. And all the classic ones that we know about could all be run using the basic primitives that we have. Some other DAOs in voting is vote length. So the period that the vote is going for, so whether it's day, week, month, each organization sets their own. And the expiration, when things expire, so they have to come up and get voted on again. So whether you want things expiring monthly, seasonally, or yearly, you set that expiration date. And again, that expiration date is in there because it's easier not to say yes than it is to say no. But also, people might die. They might just disappear. Maybe they made an agreement, but they forgot. Whatever the case is, you want to make sure that you just don't have someone getting paid for 1 year when they're not part of the organization anymore. So you want to set those expirations to meet your organization context. Okay, so here's some suggestions on some basic organization patterns to get going. So we are due a decentralized human organization, and we have a different meeting type for each one of those elements. So when we're talking about our decentralized governance system, that's a separate meeting. This is, what roles should we have? What policies should we change? What should our, quorum and unity and all those different DAOs I was talking about? Like, all of those decisions is a separate container where we're talking about the meta strategy, how we're making decisions, how do we decide how we decide, that type of stuff. So there's separate blocks for that. The second one is the human, and it sits right in the center because it's the glue that holds everything together. So the human meetings are about getting to understand each other, building tribe, having fun, group coherence. Like, this is so important that groups, they want this, but they don't set an intentional space for it. So here's an invitation for all groups to get really intentional and say, nope, we have these human connection sessions. So this is where we build solidarity and cohesion and really get to understand each other. The last one is what we're all most familiar with. It's the operational meetings, coming together, getting stuff done. And it's really important to have these different containers because if there's governance stuff that's alive, people don't like how the voting's going, and there's not a clear container for this to take place, then it's going to come up in the operational gatherings. And that's going to frustrate people because people that are there to get stuff done and talk about action and move forward, they're going to be annoyed that they're now talking about, how do we decide how we decide. They don't want to participate in that. And this is what we've uncovered. So this is why it's really important to make sure you're having separate containers for these conversations to exist and take place. And then again, you could pause this so you can read about some best practices here if you'd like. Okay, who is Hypha? So this is a snapshot of some of our core team, what we've been up to. But there's actually over 100 different members that have earned Hypha in some capacity, so we've been pretty decentralized on that front, but this is most of the core team. But also we're a DAO, and things are very flexible, so some of these people don't exist anymore. And this is kind of what we would like to, or aren't participating in Hypha anymore. And this is likely going to be true for a lot of different DAOs that are getting set up, where they have pretty fluid membership. And this is actually really, really cool, and we'd like to see a whole ecosystem of organizations this way, where people are flowing in one organization and into another, and they're flowing from different circles through different organizations. We start looking and acting like a whole ecosystem of organizations with a shared common purpose to create whatever it is we're out there creating. In our case, it's a regenerative economic system and a new organization governance systems for different types of civilizations that could best serve us and humanity on our planet, which is what I'm going to get into right here with the Hypha token. So what's our skin in this game? Ours meaning Hypha. How does our token work? And this is some understanding and idea of potentially how you might want to set up your token to operate. There's the very classic equity-like token way where we say, if you own this token, you get a share of profits. Like, fine. If you're doing that, though, you likely need to set up a legal entity and have it attached to that. But again, consult a lawyer. What we have is a utility token, which grants you access, right? So everything Hypha is building is open source. You can take all our code, you can spin it up yourself, and you can run your own container with your own organization. But if you want to be part of the Hypha ecosystem of organizations that are all connected with each other, which kind of looks like this, where you might have on the slider here, all the different organizations that you're a part of, all in one UI where it's really easy and flexible to communicate and cross-coordinate and work together as a whole. If you want to be part of that, then you need to acquire Hypha token and stake it. And what this does is it means every organization is now co-invested into the success of the whole ecosystem. You're all benefiting from these Hypha tools. You want us to keep building awesome new tools, and how you keep financing us to do that is by more and more organizations joining the ecosystem, buying and locking Hypha out of circulation. And the more Hypha that's bought and locked out, the less Hypha there is, the more valuable it is, etc. So this is how Hypha kind of operates and what brings value to the Hypha token, is that every new organization wanting to join the Hypha ecosystem needs to take Hypha and lock it. But then we've moved beyond like saying, okay, if you want to join Hypha, you got to pay us $100 each month. Instead, we say you need to be a co-investor in this whole ecosystem. But now if the Hypha token goes up, well, you own Hypha too, the value you're holding goes up with it. And if at any point you're not happy with the ecosystem, it's not bringing you value anymore, you can take your Hypha tokens and sell. So now you have an asset that's appreciating in value as the whole ecosystem grows and thrives. So this is what aligns all of our incentives together to create a cooperative economic system where we're operating as one whole unit. This is really, really cool. But the main idea here is that you can create different types of tokens that represent anything from access to your organization and services. Maybe it's a required payment token that you need to have this token in order to pay for certain services. Maybe it's a staking token like you have here, where members have to come and stake this token in order to get membership or access to the organization or whatever. There's a really infinite number of ways you can design your token for your organization. But the main use case is contribution accounting. This helps account for all the different ways people are contributing. And then the game as an organization becomes, how do we make this token valuable? And this is what the group is actually coming together to do, is bring value to this token. Hypha also works as like an index token. So as Hypha is helping other organizations get set up, we encourage them to airdrop tokens onto all the current Hypha holders and stakers. So every new organization that joins the Hypha ecosystem, a share of this organization gets given to all the existing organizations in the ecosystem. And this is one of the ways we create a cooperative economy again, where everyone's co-invested in each other's success. So now we have that incentive and extrinsic reward, and an intrinsic one because we like each other and want to create together. But we have that extrinsic motivation to work with other organizations in the ecosystem, to buy from each other. The last one is paying for certain services. So most of Hypha is going to be this freemium model where most stuff to use is free. It's that stake and you're going to get access to it. But specialty contracts, or if you're using way more bandwidth than what you're typically allotted, or consulting fees for Hypha and all this other stuff, you use the Hypha token to pay for it, and then you burn that token. So anyway, so this is some model that Hypha's employed. So there's some ideas that you can take from here, like a staking token. You might design a burning token where people have to acquire it and burn it to pay for certain services. But the general idea that we recommend is just start off having a contribution accounting token, and then build in more functionality into that token as you evolve and as you get a clearer understanding of how you can employ that token within your ecosystem. Let's keep going here. Cool. So what are we doing from Hypha? Like when you're not buying a product from a company. Hypha's not a company. We're a movement. We're a decentralized organization building open source tools. We're purpose driven to build new economic systems and organization structure for humanity. So you're not buying a product here. You're joining that movement. And that's why our token looks that way. You're not paying for a service. You're becoming co-invested in this movement to become part of it. So as other organizations are joining, as you're bringing more value to the ecosystem, Hypha then becomes co-owned by all the organizations that are a part of it. And then we're just sitting here continuing to build governance and organization and economic tools that best serve all the organizations that are part of our movement. So as you come in here and there's different ways that you want to make decisions or there's different ways you want to organize, great. Let us know. Let Hypha know. We can add it to our roadmap and we can start building those things together. And most importantly, we can create a new story for what civilization could look like. A new story for humanity. And have a lot of fun doing it. Cool. So as a recap, what do you need to set sail? You need to set those salary bands. What do time contributors get? Are investors getting a bonus? What we really highly recommend is start it off at the very beginning to say each token is worth $1 or €1 or whatever you're used to, accounting in. And then say, we're going to give a salary. We're going to figure out that salary band and give that salary to all the early founders and core team and members adding time. And we're going to treat it the exact same as what the investors get for putting in dollars. because then that balances the equation. For every dollar that investor didn't have to pay out as a salary is instead going to be going to the person who's taking a token instead of a dollar. So it's balancing it all out. Investors come in, they put in $1 million, they get 1 million tokens. Then those $1 million can be paid out in lieu of paying out another 1 million tokens. Or you're able to use that $1 million to subsidize paying out $5 million worth of actual contributions, which is what this system actually sets up, which is pretty cool. Second, you're going to need your initial roles. Start off small here and also reflect the reality that exists today. Don't create a whole bunch of roles of what you want necessarily. That can get really complex really fast. But instead, create the roles that are currently existing from people who are currently part of your organization. Have that reflect explicitly what they're doing. Because that's the real important part of doing roles. It's just to make explicit what was maybe hidden or implicit. And just say, this is exactly what's happening, put it into a role, and get started that way. Then start a very basic org and circle design. Start with one anchor circle. If you're a group of 5 people, all you need is an anchor circle. Define the roles that are part of that, and then get going. Don't try to create a whole bunch of different circles and stuff if you're only 5 people. So try to keep it as small and as nimble as possible. And then launch and grow from there. Don't let perfection get in the way of good enough again. So don't try to overcomplicate things here. This basic structure is good enough to kind of get going. Okay, so this is where we are going to try to help a lot more. So these are all these different tools. You can pull up the deck in the show notes. You can also see links to all these articles and documents. And this is going to give you templates in order to grow from. So the idea is we've been at this for 4 years. We've learned a lot. We've done a lot. We've fallen in all the pitfalls we could fall into, and we're trying to build templates so you don't have to do the same thing. And I'm seeing that exactly with every organization that I've been talking with. They're asking the same questions we were, right? So what we've done is you can look at our game guide. How do we make decisions as an organization? And then we encourage you to copy and edit it. You don't have to copy what we're doing at all. Just use it to form ideas, delete the stuff that works for you, add in new stuff. But it gives you a place to get started, right? The same thing with our Hypha Handbook. So this is our contributor handbook. It says, how to show up, what our ethos and policy and vision is, how do you fill roles, quests, contributions, all of that. It's really in-depth, and it gives you the whole story of how you might set up your organization. We have a simple role best practices. What we recommend is if you're already a group of people doing stuff together, but you don't have roles defined, send this roles best practices out to every member and say, okay, you define your own roles. And start it off that way. So each person can reflect and say, okay, I'm working in this area and this area and this area, so I'm actually doing 3 different roles, and then they can create their initial roles to be part of the organization. It's a really great way to get started. Otherwise, you can copy what Hypha's done, because Hypha started off that way, where everyone was creating their own roles. But then what ended up happening was we had 100 different roles, and people weren't really great at actually separating role and soul. So we ended up having hundreds of roles that looked like an individual person. It was kind of messy. So Hypha, and if you go to our handbook, you can learn more about what we did, is we made 5 different role archetypes that actually account for all the different ways you could show up and contribute to really anything. And so far we haven't figured anything that could be outside of this 5, so it's a pretty good model for us. So those 5 archetypes pair with the 7 different complexity bands, those salary bands we were talking about before, 7 fingers, to create 35 different roles. So we figured out a minimum viable 35 roles that could fit to capture all the different contributions that an organization might need. So you can follow what Hypha did with that 35 model, or go ahead and create all the different roles that you might want and need. But at a very minimum, go check out the Hypha Handbook, go see what we've done, and see if you can't build on that model or learn something from it. Next is we have this template for contribution accounting. Let me actually just go to it real quick. This helps you get started right now. So instead of coming into a due to kick it off, we actually really recommend you start off using this template. So just come here, make a copy of it, and start adding your own stuff. These orange areas is what you actually want to edit. Don't edit anything else but what's orange. And then you get to start tweaking. So you can change your salary bands here. Instead of 70,000 as your minimum, maybe 50,000 or whatever. Instead of having 7, delete these ones, then you only have 4. Whatever. You can modify this as much to your heart's content. And then what you're going to see is it's going to start distributing value. So you can come in here and put all the names of the different contributors, what salary bands they're getting, and then their full-time commitment for each one of the months that they've been part of. So let's say this person's been at 100%, right? And they're making 90,000. Well, they're going to get 7,500 a month. But How much were they paid up front? Well, this person making 7,500, he didn't actually take anything up front. So these are the tokens that he's going to earn. So you can actually fill this out, and then at the side of it, you're going to see the percent org ownership. And this is going to give you a good idea if you did a good job with the pie splitting and with your salary bands and all that. You're going to look at this and be like, okay, the percent of org ownership across all our different members makes a lot of sense. It looks good. It feels good. I think we have a good model. If it doesn't look good and it doesn't feel good, you can keep tweaking your model until it looks right. So we have the contributors here. You have the capital investors down here, and you can use this template to try to track that. The last thing that's really important is this multiplier. We highly recommend this, and that's when you're starting in a venture early on. There's a lot of risk. If you're taking organization tokens, there's a pretty big risk those tokens are going to be worth 0, especially at the very beginning. But as that organization matures, that risk goes down, and you can capture that by giving a month multiplier. So the first month might have a 2x multiplier. The second month might have a 1.x multiplier, 1.8. Third month might have, a 1.5, etc. So what you're doing here is you're saying to contributors and investors, the earlier you come in, the more you commit up front, the more value you're going to get long term if this works. So this is another one of those game theory components that we employ to bring more value and energy into the ecosystem to kick it off and get it going. This is exactly what Hypha did, and it worked really well for us. So we encourage, use this template, tear it apart, make what you want. You get to assign the dollar value you want your token to be if you want it to be equal to $1, and how much voice tokens people get for every dollar contributed. So tweaking all of this is going to help design your org. So this is what the Hypha Handbook looks like. Again, open it up, tear through it. There's a lot of really good information in here, at least just ideas that might help you understand what you want to set up as an organization. Next is we have our game guide. So why the Hypha Handbook is kind of the operating manual for how to play. The game guide is these are our strict rules, and it's meant to be really short. So it's only 12 pages, and every organization should have something similar. This is our policies, this is how we operate, this is what we've agreed to. And something really clear that every new member showing up, they can read this, they can be like, yep, this is how things work, I get it, and they can start contributing and playing and building with you guys. Cool. And the final thing I'm going to do to run through you guys today is just a 5-minute overview of the current DO and actually what it looks like. Oh, yeah, let's just start off here. Let's not go to somewhere complicated. So I showed you in the presentation what the DAO or the DO is going to look like with this new release, which is way more beautiful. Actually, let me just do that one more time so you get an idea of, probably what it looks like today. Because by the time you watch this, we'll already have released it. So it's going to be looking like this. Really, really beautiful design. But this is what it currently looks like. So I'll give you a little bit of a rundown to explain a little bit about how this is set up. So when someone first shows here, they can apply for a role. So I want to come in, I want to apply for a role. I can click here. It'll take me to all the roles that exist. And this is what I was talking about with us creating those 35 roles. You actually see them here, where we have storytelling and communicating is a role archetype, and there's 7 of them based on the complexity of how you're storytelling and communicating, or how you're building and developing, etc. So you can learn a little bit more about our archetypes in our handbook. So then people can come here, they can see all the roles that exist, and they can come here and apply for one. It says, I can click on the role, and it'll tell me what the role is, how much I get paid, how many of those roles exist, and the minimum amount I have to take in Hypha. So this is really cool. Every role you create in your organization, you get to decide how much can be paid up front versus how much has to be taken in your org tokens. So maybe there's something that's really valuable, like you need a developer and you're willing to pay them 100% up front, because you have to have that role. Great, you can put the minimum at 0% and say, we'll pay you 100% in cash if that's what you need. Or you can have another role that's maybe a researcher that's not so vital. Researchers are incredibly vital, but let's just say there's a role that isn't. But it's a nice to have. You could say, okay, well, we'd have this role, but they need to take at least 80% in the organization tokens because we don't want to be a big drain on our treasury. Then you could say this role requires 80% minimum is taken in org tokens. Cool. So that's what that minimum org token is for. Then you have a role cap, how many of these roles exist, and then, of course, you have your salary, what you're going to get paid for filling it. Then when someone comes in to actually apply, they tell all the reasons why people want to vote for them, what they're going to bring, etc., etc. Then they say how much they're committed. So we're talking about that before. Are you full-time? 100%. Are you really partial time? 10%. And what you see is the salary automatically adjusts as you're playing with that commitments, right? So let's say I'm 100% committed. Then I get to say how much I'm going to take upfront versus deferred. In this case, this role requires I take 30% deferred, so I'm going to put, you know what, but I really believe in this organization, so I'm going to take 80% deferred. So you actually see what happened here. When I'm 0% deferred, it's all in dollars. When I move to be deferred, the dollars go down and the token goes up, right? Okay, and then the last thing here, well, you can actually see the month per week that you actually get paid. The last thing here is how long you're in that assignment for, or how long you're applying to be in that assignment for. We set a maximum for 12, but every organization gets to set your own maximum. So we say every assignment is 12 weeks maximum. We want to refresh ourselves every season. But maybe you're a really mature organization, you don't want that much turnover, you might say, you know, you're 54 or every year or whatever. So as an organization, you get to decide that. But anyway, you say what phase you're starting on, the number of periods you're applying for, and you put in your dates. Cool. So that's what roles and assignments look like. If you come in here and you don't see a role that you want, it doesn't fit to you, but you think value could be added to the organization in a way that they don't understand, this is where the DAO, the D in DAO comes in. Because I can come over to here and I can propose a new role. Right now there's no role proposals up. If there were, you'd be able to see them. But I could come in here and I can create a new role and say, hey, this is my new role. And this is how every do starts. It starts with a blank canvas to say there are no roles that exist and every new role needs to be created and then voted in. Then once that role is voted in and approved by the community, it's going to be over here by agreements. After it's been made as an agreement, it's going to exist as a role that is then available. And Hypha's already gone through the work of making all of its roles. Probably won't need to make any new role for a long time coming. The second part of doing that is then badges. So the same thing. Every organization starts off with no badges. You come here and you want to create your badge. Let me show you some of our badges. So we've already made these agreements to create these badges. And a badge, when you open it up, it gives you certain benefits. So holding this badge gives you a 2.5% bonus in your voice that you earn when you're filling your roles. Because if you're a facilitator, you're helping groups organize, we think you're adding more wisdom and and experience to the organization, so we're going to give you more voice. We want you to be able to have more voice in this organization. But we're not going to give you a bonus in your dollars or Hypha tokens. We're just going to give you a bonus here. But the inverse could work. You can have an apprentice badge, for example, and you can give out this badge to folks who are, they're just getting started. They want to learn, and maybe they earn, half the equity upfront or half the dollars upfront for, being in that apprentice role. We don't have anything like that. All of ours are multipliers at this moment. So anyway, this is kind of what badges look like. And then I can apply for a badge by putting in, how long I want to apply for it down below. Badges do other things like give you rights. So I need to be holding the enroller badge if I'm going to be able to come here and let new members into the organization. So only people holding the enroller badge gets to come. Wow, so a lot of members here. I think the enrollers aren't doing their job. That's me. I need to kind of get onto that. So anyway, every organization gets to decide who's holding the enroller badge. And they have the ability to then let new people into the organization or not. Let's go back to badges. And then the final one that's a really big one is the treasurer badge. And these are the people who have the control over off-chain treasury assets. So, for example, Hypha, we hold some of our treasury in things like Bitcoin and Ethereum and EOS and things that don't exist on our blockchain. So we have a treasurer badge that then gives rights to a certain number of people to have access over those funds. And that's then governed by this treasury badge. So you need to hold this badge in order to then be able to sign the multi-sig to send Bitcoin and stuff. What else do we want to go over here? Okay, yeah, so you start off with no badges, you create your badges. You start off with no roles, you create your roles. And then after those things are created, people come in here and they make role assignments. And you can see Luke right here, he's making a role assignment to be a Hypha front-end dev holding the building and developing B5 role. And you can see all of his reasoning why up here in the top corner. I know my face is blocking a little bit off. He's saying he's coming in and committing at 80%. He's going to take half deferred. So then this is his weekly salary. This is his monthly salary. And he wants to apply for it for 16 periods in total. So he's extending it for 4 more periods beyond what he's previously applied for it for. Then you can come down here and see all the different people that have voted on it, how they voted. Right now, everyone's yes. What you see here is that the 100% endorsed is green, but the percent voted, the quorum, is red. Right now, not enough people have actually voted on this for it to pass, so it won't pass unless more people come in the next 4 days in order to vote on it. So even though 100% are in favor, more people need to be for it in order for it to actually pass. So then that's how an organization starts. You start off with nothing, you make all of your agreements on what roles and badges should exist, and then everyone comes in and applies for all those roles and assignments to those, all the assignments and badges, right? And then that's how the organization starts kicking itself off. Then you can come in and make contributions. So this is how every investor who's put any capital into Hypha has come in here and done this exact thing. This is a contractor. He doesn't hold a role necessarily. He's a development agency that we work with. So he's come in here and said, hey, these are all the stuff we've worked on over this period. This is the pay that we want. So this is how you can contract with agencies and other DAOs and other dues and other organizations, is they can come in here and say, this is the work we've done, we want to get paid X. And then you can pay them out in bulk. Or an investor might come in and say, hey, I've transferred $1 million worth of Bitcoin to the multi-sig treasury. I would like $1 million worth of, the organization's equity tokens. And then the community is like, yep, we like that. We voted up, it issues them tokens. So the contributions is then how everything else that's being, value being added to the organization is captured and added. So this is how a DAO gets started. It starts off blank. Then as anyone adds value to the organization, either through investing, putting in their time, giving assets like land or whatever it is, then comes in here and makes those requests. And then the community then governs how that starts. And again, the voice as well. So how you issue the voice is then going to be all governed here. If you want to be a one-person, one-voice organization, then you say every member that you decide to let into the organization gets one voice. So when I enroll you, you get one voice. Awesome. And then what you have is that then no contributions or role assignments or anything else pay out voice. So then everything is 0. So instead of this guy earning 6,500 voice, he's going to earn 0. So no one earns any voice anymore. Everyone holds the same voice in your organization. Or you can then give experts a voice. Someone can come in here and maybe you're not paying them dollars or equity at all. They're just someone you want to be making good decisions because they're a powerful advisor and they don't even want to own anything of it or whatever. They can come in here and say, hey, we're going to give you a whole bunch of voice because we love the decisions that you would be able to make. This could be used for organizations that want to be governing bioregions. They want to give voice to, indigenous elders. And these elders don't want a financial stake because they don't want to have that as, conflicting interests. They just want to be able to make decisions and contribute that way. Cool. You can issue them voice and you don't even have to give them any equity. But I recommend you do anyway. Cool. So that's the basic rundown here. I'm not going to get too complicated because there's some other videos that really get into the nitty-gritty of how a DAO works. But this is how you can get started. I hope this is really helpful. Check out the extra links in the video for more content to dive into all these extra things that we've created. Yeah, I know this was a lot, so feel free to read this again. There's also going to be a link to our Discord where you can hop in there. You can say hello. You can talk about what you're doing, ask any questions. There's a lot of people that are super friendly, and we can have a lot of fun. So I want to close this off by, realigning once again what this is all about, which is right here. And it's really big and beautiful. The whole point of what I'm up to, at least, maybe not everyone in Hypha agrees with me, but certainly what I'm doing here is here to build a new economic system for humanity. A cooperative economy where we're working together, all of our organizations, moving as a whole integrated organization and ecosystem to build new types of civilizations. And these are the tools that allow us to get there. And any type of organization that wants to take part in this movement, come in here, build your organization structure, start making decisions together, and let's have a whole lot of fun. So, thank you for sticking through this. It's been a blast, and I will see you later.